You're listening to episode 145, Understanding Your Past in Order to Move Through It, with Jeremy Schneider. Welcome to the Grass Gets Greener podcast, the show for survivors by survivors. I'm your host, Melissa Wilson, a bullying survivor and anti-bullying advocate. And each week you'll hear from a survivor who has overcome a traumatic experience to go on to not only survive, but thrive, so that you can too, starting now. Hey there, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me here today for this latest episode of the podcast. I'm so grateful to have you here, and we're going to be joined by new guest, Jeremy Schneider, author of Fatherhood in 40-Minute Snapshots. Before we get into it, I do just want to let you know that this episode is sponsored by Navni. Navni is the top-ranked anonymous writing website in the world. Navni provides free wellness resources and low-cost online therapy services to help people cope with various levels of emotional distress. Write anonymously, feel better at novni.com. So Jeremy is a marriage and family therapist, and he's also a father who's had to work his way through his own past trauma. He's going to share his story with us today, and the struggles he's had along the way, and the things that have been able to help him in his healing journey. In particular, we're going to talk about the impact his mother cutting him out of his life had on him, how every area of his life was affected by trauma. We're going to talk a lot about triggers. Jeremy's going to talk about overcoming a major depressive episode, and how he's used therapy in his healing, and how he knew that he wanted to be a therapist since the age of 9. And he's also going to talk about his book and his future book projects. So I'm really excited to bring Jeremy's story to you here today, and hope that you're looking forward to it as well. And so without further ado, we'll go ahead and get into this one, and I'll go bring Jeremy on. Jeremy, welcome to the podcast, and thank you for joining me here today to share your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here as well, and I'm glad that we got connected. When I heard about you and your story and the work that you're doing, I definitely wanted to have you on the show. And on your website, it says, I want to help you understand the importance and power of understanding yourself better to live a healthier, happier, and more satisfied life. To more fully experience your life instead of just surviving it. And I love that. And, this show is about inspiring the listeners to do just that in spite of what they've gone through growing up. And I know, we'll talk about your book as well, Fatherhood in 40-Minute Snapshots, where you've used your trepidation around being a dad and turned that into a book that can support others. So what I like to do here, Jeremy, is have you share with us a summary of what you experienced growing up so that we have that context. And then we'll go from there and get into, what has helped you in your journey and the work that you're doing today as well. So, please, share with us what you'd like us to know about what you experienced growing up.
Sure. And thank you for that introduction.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's obviously it's always hard to sort of just jump in and tell everybody everything, but I do agree that it's really important to get a good picture. And so let me just start by saying, for me, the traumas that I experienced were both on different levels. So there was some physical, there was some psychological, absolutely. There was some sexual and emotional abuse. And then the second part of it for me is the people. And so this involved not primarily my mother, also my grandfather, and two other quasi strangers.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the third level that I think is also important to think about when it comes to trauma is the length of time. And so for me, this was something that really went on from about 2 years old until I was 18.
Okay.
And I think that those, when you think about trauma, I think sort of understanding what it was, who it was, and how long it was is a really important way of sort of understanding the kind of impact that can have and what the road to recovery will look like.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And what was it at 18 that, kind of led to it stopping? Was it that you had, just becoming an adult and moving out on your own and that sort of thing, or?
I wish what it was that my mother cut me out of her life.
Mm.
And so that was pretty much the last time we ever had a relationship. And so, I didn't know it at the time. At the time, I thought it was one of the worst things that had ever happened to me. But over the years, particularly through this healing process, that was maybe one of the best things that could have ever happened to me. Again, of course, at the time, I literally ended up in the hospital the next day. I was so profoundly affected by it. But I have another book coming out, so I have Fatherhood in 40-minute snapshots. But uh, this year in 2018, I'm publishing my memoir about what I've been through, and it's called In My Rearview Mirror, and it really stems from once she was in my rearview mirror, once these people were in my rearview mirror, I was able to actually start to think about how do I heal, how do I overcome this, what have I had to deal with, and beginning to understand all of that and be able to work on it. So that was a huge day for me. It's just its meaning has changed so much over time.
Mm. Yeah, I can imagine, how difficult that must be, because no one, growing up ever thinks that, it's better to not have a parent in your life, right? I mean, that's what we all want. We want to have kind of that normal childhood where we have, that good home life, and we have parents that, we can rely on, and that are there for us and provide for us, and meet those needs that we need to have met growing up. And so, yeah, I can see how, that's just a difficult thing for that to happen. That's not what's supposed to happen, right?
Right. I mean, I think that's part of it. I think for those of us that have been through very difficult, excuse me, experiences growing up, it's not only just what we experience, but it's also what we never got. I didn't even know what unconditional love was until I was lucky enough to have met my wife in college. And so I didn't even know I was missing it until I experienced it for the first time. And I was like, oh, this is so different, you know? And I think that's, certainly for me, but I think a lot of people that go through this, one of the hardest parts is not just what happened, but what we lost, what we didn't have and had a right to have, but didn't get to.
It's so true. And that absolutely affects us as we become adults, and we look back on kind of what we missed out on, and, wonder how we can sort of, have that, or have those things, or have those skills, as an adult. And those becomes the things that we have to work on in our healing. And, um, so, and I think especially like, I mean, you talk about how long, someone has gone through something traumatic for. And, um, I mean, certainly, in your case, I mean, you talk about having experienced trauma for pretty much your entire childhood. That certainly, shapes who you become as an adult. And
Absolutely.
so share with us, kind of the ways that you were noticing that you were impacted by what you had experienced as you were becoming an adult.
I think one of the hardest parts for me, and I also have seen this in other people, is, we when you go through, let me phrase it this way. Having a one-time experience of trauma is terrible. And I think those are very hard to recover from. Obviously, it takes some work to be able to get through that. But when it's your immediate family and it is something that happens over time, over a period of years, that's the way it feels like you're supposed to be. And we learn so much about how we're supposed to act, how we're supposed to behave, how we're supposed to think. So much of my personality was really built around making sure my mother was okay, or making sure these people got what they wanted, versus thinking about my own needs and my own wants. And so that's certainly one of the hardest things that I've tried to tackle in my life. What is it that I want? I spent 18 years trying to hide or repress what I wanted because it didn't factor into any decision. It didn't matter what I wanted. It mattered what they wanted. And so, you do that for a really long time, and sadly you get good at it. And so how do you start to shift that and start thinking, it's okay that, wait, in this scenario, I don't want that. I want something else. And learning it's okay. You're allowed to have what you want. You're allowed to get what you need. You're allowed to act on that. I think that was a really big piece of it. And I
Yeah,
think
and understanding that we have choices now, right?
Right, exactly. Right. And that's something that you don't have when you're a child, and there are these all-powerful beings in your life that are telling you what to do or forcing you to do things that you don't want. And I think, I remember, and I still struggle with it, to be honest, but I remember when I was younger, I don't mean as a kid, I mean in my 20s and 30s, thinking that there was something wrong with me, that I was broken, that I was handicapped. And this belief that the problems that I had personally, within the struggles I've had with depression, or whether it's the struggles I've had with anxiety, or the fear I have with doing sort of regular daily tasks, the belief that that meant that there was something wrong with me, or that it meant that I was broken, was something that I was raised with. And that, in the last 10 years or so, excuse me, being able to look at that and say, you know what? I don't think it's that I'm broken. It's that things were done to me that were so terrible that it's profoundly affected who I am and the way I am. I am not afraid because I'm weak. I'm afraid because I was trained to be afraid for 18 years. And that kind of fight or flight, that kind of constant state of, oh my God, what's going to happen next? It takes a toll on your mental and physical makeup. And so sort of beginning to understand, like, whoa, the magnitude of what I've been through and how it's impacted me is both upsetting, obviously, and disturbing, but in some ways it's kind of freeing, because like, oh, so the reason I'm afraid to, talk to my boss about this issue is because, not because I'm weak or I don't know how to stand up for myself. It's because I'm reenacting the scenario from when I was a kid with my mom or with my parents or with whoever. And so it I think understanding what we've been through really helps us to be able to be kinder to ourselves, to be more understanding about the side effects, frankly, of what we've been through.
Yeah, that is so true. And it's as we are sort of going through our healing, and we're starting to process what we've been through and becoming more aware of the ways that we've been affected by it. Yes, on the one hand, like, it can seem overwhelming at times, and sort of as we're unpeeling or peeling back layers of that onion, as we say, it can seem like there's so much there and so much to process. But on the flip side of that, I think, becoming aware of these things, it's allowing us to work on, our triggers and the things that are continuing to, impact us and keep us, kind of stuck in the past, and be able to do some healing and to move forward. And it sounds like, that's what you've been able to do, in your own situation. Tell us a little more about, like, the specific things that you've had to work on in your healing.
Yeah, I think I know this is not the answer you want, but everything. I mean, there was not an area of my life that was unaffected.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. Absolutely.
So it's I think about, like, obviously relationships are very difficult. I just sort of live with the idea that I'm not worthy of love. And how do you healthfully manage a relationship when you don't really feel that you're worth it? How do you healthfully participate in a relationship when you're not really allowed to want something or ask for something, you know? I think those were some of the big challenges. I think becoming a parent for me was an incredible challenge because, I clearly didn't have good role models. There was a lot I had to learn on my own. And being there for my kids and sort of seeing, not that it's easy to be a parent, but that it was easy to want to care for them and want to love them, really created this kind of bizarre juxtaposition in my life where I am, I'm soothing my son before he goes to sleep, helping him calm down, helping him think happy thoughts and thinking about ideas to have good dreams about. Whereas for me at his age, nobody did that for me. I had to do all of that on my own, and I was terrified. And that sort of experiencing both of those moments at the same time felt, again, this kind of like, wow, I'm able to give him what I didn't have, but also it's not that hard. Why couldn't my parents have done that for me? Excuse me. And I think that's I think that's an added challenge of becoming a parent. And then of course the flip side is, my kids will do something that I don't even necessarily know is a trigger for me, and I will reenact something that I went through. I don't mean abuse wise, but like I might lose my temper, right? And realizing that that's because when I was a kid, this happened or that happened, and being able to tie that together was really valuable. But it doesn't always happen quickly. And so sometimes, I would yell and I would feel terrible about it. And I couldn't understand why I would get so angry. Um, and I
Yeah, it's
think
not
that
always easy to make that connection in that moment.
no, it's not, especially in the moment. And to me, and I think you've touched on this earlier, and I really wanted to follow up about it, is that I think for so many people who think about the traumas that they've been through and think about how hard it is to face them, what's the value in doing it? Like, why would you put yourself through that kind of difficulty and pain and re-experiencing things that you tried to forget in the first place? And I think one of the biggest reasons is because, one, understanding the things that trigger us, the things that affect us, gives us a little bit more sense of control over how we react to things than we ever had when we were kids, right?
Hmm.
Part of
Hmm.
the problem of being abused as a child is you don't have any control. And when you're an adult and you're reenacting all of the stuff that happened to you as a kid, being triggered by this and that, you're also still acting out of control, which is very upsetting. Being
Hmm.
able to use therapy, take advantage of therapy, really explore what we've been through and how it affects us, and be able to see, oh, in these types of situations, I tend to get upset, or I tend to get really angry, or I tend to get very scared, whatever it is, so that when it happens, I don't go, oh, this sucks. What's wrong with me? I, I mean, sometimes I do that, let's be honest. But a lot of the time I'm able to say, okay, but I know where this comes from. This isn't because I'm weak. This is because of what I've been through. And I think one of the most important ways that we help to get some sense of control over ourselves again after not having had that during whatever trauma we went through. And I think the other thing that I really think is so crucial about doing the work to explore what you've been through and how it's affected you is because it's the only way to feel something good. One of the things that I learned when I was going through this process is that I would be with my family. So I have a wife and two kids. I have twins, and we would be doing something together. And I would be like, this kind of feels good. And then at some point, I would just cut off. I would just completely disconnect my feelings. And I was like, this is this really good moment, and I'm not feeling it. And it took me a while to realize that what happens to me is I would get overwhelmed. And when I was a kid, being overwhelmed always meant being overwhelmed with horrible feelings. And so I would disconnect to protect myself. But as an adult, I would get overwhelmed with my family, but it would be something good. But my body was like, no, got to protect yourself, and cut off those feelings. And being able to understand that and being able to sort of process so much of what I went through as a kid, but do it as an adult, I think is been really valuable to me in terms of being able to feel joy, to feel love, to feel fun and happiness that I just never felt when I was a kid. And I think the only way that we can really do that is by doing the work.
Yeah, it's so key to do that work. And, like you're saying, I mean, to be able to experience those positive feelings, we have to be able to allow ourselves to have feelings, to
Right.
not be scared of them. And, oftentimes we do become scared of our feelings because of what we've gone through growing up. And we've learned that, to feel those things is not safe. And sometimes, when we have a certain feeling, it means something bad is going to happen. And so we kind of shut ourselves off from that. And so it's helping ourselves to understand later in life that it's okay, it's safe to have these feelings, to experience joy and happiness, and to allow ourselves to have that, and to not feel like something bad is going to happen as a result. Um, so Jeremy, tell us, like, when did you start doing this work, and what did that look like at the beginning? Like, were you working with a therapist? Were you doing it on your own?
Well, ironically, I was put in therapy when I was 9. Um, and so I kind of grew up in therapy. And I think while that therapy really only taught me how to kind of survive in a very difficult situation, and didn't, my that therapist didn't do the job that she needed to in terms of protecting me from what I was experiencing. It did sort of kind of have this third voice in my head about, thinking about my feelings and thinking about how my body reacts to things and so on and so forth. So I did have a bit of an advantage in almost growing up a little bit in therapy. I think the work really got started when I was 25, 26. I had my first major episode of depression. Or let me rephrase that. I had my only major episode of depression, but it was more so because I had spent most of my childhood being depressed, had gone off to college and gone to grad school, and started to have periods where I wasn't depressed, and then got completely depressed again and lost about 2 years. There was a good or a really terrible, 9 months or so where I didn't leave the house except to go to therapy. Um, and I was going to therapy 3 times a week, and I was working really hard, and it was the only thing I did. And I couldn't hold a job. I couldn't concentrate. I couldn't read books. I couldn't do anything. I mean, I was profoundly depressed. And, getting out of that, doing the work to get out of that, and then realizing that I needed to do work to prevent that from happening again, it was a powerful motivator for me, and a really good example of, if I do the work, I can get to a better place. If I don't, I run the risk of going back to that period of darkness again. And so, that's how it began. And then what happens is I go through periods where I'm working really hard, and I'm usually working with someone else, like a therapist. And then, it's like, okay, I finished that phase, and, it comes to some sort of logical conclusion. I feel a little bit better. I certainly feel better than I had been. And I do work on my own. I'm almost always writing. I think that's, for me, is such a powerful therapeutic tool. I listen to a lot of music. Music for me is incredibly therapeutic. I use it to help manage my emotions, process and express my emotions. And so when music affects me, I always explore the lyrics to see why I'm having that reaction, or what it triggers within me, or what it reminds me of. And so, for me, that's almost like a constant thing that's always happening, is just this like, oh, this music is affecting me like this. What does that mean? What does that do? Oh, I'm writing about this. What does that mean? And then I come to another phase where I was like, okay, I need to do this. I'm having a lot of trouble with this particular area, whether it's being able to enjoy the love of my family, whether it's still feeling so terrified all the time, whatever it happens to be. And then I would go back into therapy for an intense period, try to work through it, and then come out the other side and rinse and repeat, so to speak. So it's not so much that I've been in therapy every week for the last 30 years, but I'm pretty much always working on myself. And there are large stretches where I'm in therapy working with someone who can help kind of guide me a little bit, or at least provide another perspective that's really valuable.
Yeah, and what I love there is, how you take the time to reflect on what you're feeling, what you're going through, and really, just stop to analyze it and understand it so that, you can see if it's something that you need to do further work in, right, to get yourself, a little further along in your healing. And then it sounds like, then you use therapy kind of, as needed to help you out in those certain situations. But I think that's great, rather than, having something come up for you and just kind of ignoring it or sweeping it under the rug. Because, as we've been talking about, I mean, it's in working through this stuff that we're going to get to that better place and we're going to feel better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's great.
And I think, one of the ways that I've always tried to think about it, for me, if I don't do the regular maintenance on myself, that regular sort of checking in, processing, looking at what I've been going through, seeing if any triggers have been triggered. If I don't do that, I definitely run the risk of getting severely depressed again. And I don't want that to happen. And so that sort of works as a motivator, but it also just consistently, once you get into that habit, it helps. It makes a difference. I'm not saying it heals me at 100%, but it makes a huge difference. And the way that I think about it is a kind of little metaphor of the thinking about a spaghetti strainer. So you know how when you boil pasta and you want to strain the water out, if you don't wash that strainer, the pasta, there's like leftover bits of pasta that clumps into it. And if you keep using it without washing it, it doesn't work anymore, right? It just gets all congealed and can't strain the water anymore. And I kind of think about it a little bit like my brain. If I don't clean it out, if I don't sort of make sure that there aren't little bits of issues and additional triggers and episodes and struggles that I'm having every day, I think of them as the kind of wounds and slights that I experience on a daily basis. If I don't process those and deal with those, they build up, they clog up my brain, and it doesn't work as well. And when my brain doesn't work as well, I'm much more susceptible to being depressed, to having additional triggers really affect me in a much more profound way. Nothing good has ever happened if I'm not taking care of myself.
Yeah, it's kind of like we have to stay on top of things, or this stuff's going to come up and get the better of us.
Yep.
So it's important to kind of to understand the things that that we can turn to, those tools, those resources that we have that we know help us, and be able to use those in those times, and to do kind of that maintenance and keep ourselves running well, and not allow ourselves to get clogged up. So that we can continue to do well, and in spite of things that might come our way that might challenge us, and any struggles that we might have, because of course, I mean, there's always going to be stuff that's going to come up and trigger us, and things that are going to challenge us in life, and we can't really avoid that. And so it's about putting ourselves in the best position that we can to do well in those situations,
and understanding that the definition of doing well sadly might not be the same for us as it is for someone who hasn't been through trauma.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we need to be okay with that. And that's not an excuse. It's a reality of what we've been through. something that has a profound effect on who we are. And being harsh on ourselves, judging ourselves, being mean to ourselves because of that only makes everything worse for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, um, Jeremy, tell us, how are you doing today? And, what sorts of things do you still come up for you that you do still struggle with?
It's funny. So I've had a somewhat difficult week. And so it's funny that we're having this conversation today. Um, so one of the things that I've really noticed recently is just this slew of physical issues that I'm struggling with. And I keep going to specialists and finding that there doesn't seem to be anything wrong, quote unquote. And yet I'm in pain. I'm suffering in some way. And, starting to realize that there's this whole other effect of trauma and PTSD on the physical body. And there may very well be these physical scars. And I don't mean because I was beaten in a way or anything like that. I mean that the part of the trauma that I've been through, because it lasted so long, put my body in this enhanced state of fight or flight for, almost 2 decades during the most important development period of my life. My body is just not the same. I have, if you were to press different parts of my body, there's a lot of pain that I'm experiencing. And for the longest time, I really thought there was something wrong with me or whatever it is. And I saw someone this week that was like, I think this is part of the trauma that you've been through. And that was really interesting because I've kind of suspected that, and to have that at least somewhat confirmed was both an incredible relief and affirmation, and also left me rageful at my family that this is another way that I'm still suffering from what they did. And I think that, that's the challenge, is that the more we get to know ourselves, the more we're able to see kind of how we've been affected. We're also better able to see how we've overcome. And so it's a tough line to keep walking. And, my brain, you don't know my brain, but my brain doesn't always view the world from a very positive light. And that's something that I've been trying to at least be more conscious of, right, over the last decade or so. But, it's challenging. How do you deal with the weight of what you've been through, even though on the outside right now, when people look at me, I think they see that I am, quote unquote, perfectly normal. And there's this sense of I'm not being fully genuine, when I'm interacting with people, because they don't know who I am. They don't know what I've been through. But there's also a sense of pride that I've done so much work to get to this point in my life that people don't realize that I've been through anything, because I'm able to handle so much of my life in a way that I couldn't 20 years ago, 25 years ago. So I guess the thing that I try to say to people is that we can't undo it, right? The traumas we experienced, they can't be erased from our blackboard. But the better that we understand what we've been through, the more aware we are of the issues that we're struggling with, the better we are to kind of compensate for them, and to work around them to get what we want, and to experience the joy and love and life that we really want. And that's why I talk about the difference between surviving and experiencing. When I was a kid, I was in survival mode. I was just trying to survive every day, just to get through the day without being too badly hurt. And as adults, I think one of the hardest transitions is to move from someone who is just surviving, who was so badly traumatized that they're just trying to survive life, and transition to that's what happened to me then, but where I am now is a different place. I'd like to experience my life. I'd like to feel the feelings of my life, good and bad. I'd like to be present in each moment as much as I can. And that's what, that's what we strive for. And I think it's a very difficult adjustment, but I think it's one of the most crucial in the recovery process. But at the end of the day, I think there's a truth that we can't undo it, but it also doesn't mean that we can't live better than we were. And it doesn't mean that we can't have the things that we desire and deserve.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, trauma affects us in so many different ways. And, we might continue to see those ways as we go through our life. But that doesn't mean that, that has to stop us from having a really great experience.
Right.
So Jeremy, tell us more about what it is that you do today.
So I'm doing a lot of writing. I've written Fatherhood in 40-minute snapshots. And so that book is a book about my experiences as an involved dad. And it's called Fatherhood in 40-minute snapshots because it's a series of really short pieces. All of them were written on my 40-minute train ride into work. And so they're these snapshots in time of a particular issue, a particular challenge, a particular moment that I wanted to share that I think were really impactful on either myself or our family, and think might be impactful on the reader. So that book's out, and I've been really enjoying talking about that. And I'm working on the next book, so it's finished. It's called In My Rearview Mirror. The manuscript is finished, now looking to kind of enter that publication phase and being able to start promotion on that and marketing, etc., and hope to have that out in the fall. I have a third book that's just draft form, still needs a lot of work, but that's really good, and that's much more focused on kind of teenage life because my kids are taller than me and bigger than me, and they're 16 and in high school, and so that's just such a fascinatingly challenging period of teenage development. So I thought that would be an interesting thing to write about, and I think it would be really good for other parents to read. And I also do some speaking. I do some parent coaching, things like that as well.
That sounds very exciting, and we'll have to keep an eye out for your future books. And you're also a marriage and family therapist as well, correct?
Correct. Yep. Yeah. So that's how it started. Coincidentally not. I wanted to be a therapist since I was the age of 9, which is the same age that I was put in therapy.
When you started therapy, okay.
Correct. And I think that there was always this sense of that there is something powerful, there is something empowering, there is, this potential quality that therapy has. I think I always felt that when I was growing up. I think I absolutely feel that as an adult and as a therapist. And so I one of the things that I love to do is to help people understand that therapy can be a difference maker. It's not just a thing you go to and talk about problems. It's a real powerful tool that you can take advantage of to really make a difference in your life.
Yeah, definitely. It's been helpful for a lot of people, and it's something that was helpful for me also. So for sure.
Yeah.
And I'll have your current book linked up on the show notes page. Tell us a little more about who can benefit from reading that.
I mean, obviously it's mostly parents. It's funny. I think I wrote it in mind with someone like my wife in my head, someone who is interested in parenting, wants to learn more about parenting, but also wants to sort of understand a bit of the male perspective when it comes to being involved as a dad and what that might look like. Maybe someone who, maybe a woman whose partner maybe is not participating in the way that she had hoped. And this book might be able to give her ideas on how she can help him do what he'd like to do. I also really hope that this book is something that young men can use, men who are in their late 20s thinking about having a kid for the first time, that this is something that they can look at and start to think, okay, wait a second, this doesn't sound nearly as terrible as it seems. I think a lot of men for generations really thought children were the end of something, right? And I think that that's the opposite. It's really the beginning of something unbelievable. And I think men, again, I'm generalizing, but men for the most part have a harder time being able to envision how life can be better with kids. And for some reason, women are a bit better able to envision that, particularly once they're pregnant, because I think there's a more powerful connection between a mother who's carrying their own baby than there is between a dad who is a little bit disconnected from that process. So I think that's, ideally what I hope the book is able to help is this, this man who is about to become a father or has just become a father and is really looking to figure out, okay, I know I want to be involved. I didn't have the greatest role model. How do I implement that on a day-to-day basis? This book gives really good examples from my life about how I was able to do that. Because again, I didn't have a good role model. So, they have that connection with me right off the bat. So hopefully that's who can benefit from the book.
Yeah, that's great. I love how, you've taken your experiences and put it into this book to help others who, might be coming from a similar place. And where can people find the book?
Probably the easiest place is to go to my website, which is jgs.net. So my name is Jeremy G. Schneider. So jgs.net.
Okay, sounds good. So Jeremy, I want to ask you the final question that I have for you today. And that is, given what you know now, if you could go back to when you were going through your tough times and give yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
I don't know if it would be advice. It would be, I would try to give hope. Just the belief that this is as worse as it gets. This is the worst period of your life. And that everything you do from here on forward will make it get better. And then we just have faith, believe, hold out hope. It's going to get better. Because I think that, to me, that was maybe the worst part, was the complete helplessness I felt and the fact that it just never seemed like it was going to get better. And there's nothing I could do about that. So I would want to go back. I would want to give him a hug and whisper in his ear, it's going to get better. It's going to get better. I promise.
Yeah, I love that. It's so important to just always have that hope and to be striving for that. So that's great. So Jeremy, before I let you go, what is the best way for people to connect with you or to find out about what you have going on? I know you mentioned your website already, so that'll be linked up. Any other ways to connect with you?
Yeah, so I'm also on Facebook and Twitter, frequently trying to share, interesting articles or studies about parenting and mental health and help people think about it in another way or understand new ideas or new alternatives to getting help. And my Twitter is JGS_author. And my Facebook is JGS author without the underscore.
Okay, sounds good. So that'll be linked up as well if anyone wants to connect with you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, other than that, I just want to thank you for coming on and for sharing with us today and, discussing the topic of healing from trauma and, things that have helped you and hopefully it's been inspiring and given some hope for those who are listening. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, well, I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks for listening to the show today. This has been the Grass Gets Greener podcast, episode 145. Go to thegrassgetsgreener.com/Jeremy S. to find the links mentioned during this episode or to leave a comment. So I hope you enjoyed this episode with Jeremy today. And, one of the messages that comes through for me in this episode is that we may have to keep doing the work, but we can still be in a good place. We may always have triggers. There might be times in our lives where things just come up for us as a result of what we experienced. But that doesn't mean that we can't still have, a great life and have great experiences in life. And I hope that you're encouraged by that and that gives you a new perspective of looking at healing. The perspective that we have on our current situations makes all the difference. And I want to encourage you to focus on the positive in your life. Even if it's something small, appreciate it and be grateful for it and allow yourself to see the progress that you have made. And of course, use that to continue to make progress because you deserve that as well. So thank you for tuning in today and come back for the next episode. And in the meantime, head over to the website to grab your free copy of the Top 10 Strategies Guide for Survivors. In it, you'll find the top 10 most common strategies my podcast guests have used for overcoming the effects of past trauma. It's a great place to get started if you're looking for some strategies that can help you in your healing, as they have helped my guests. And you can find that at thegrassgetsgreener.com/guide or also on the show notes page. So be sure to grab that if you haven't yet. And lastly, don't forget to head over to iTunes or Stitcher to leave the show a rating and review so that we can reach as many survivors as possible. And as always, have hope.